My name is Trueson. I'm a graphic designer at Brookside Studios, and this is my Marketing Minute Monday.
Yes.
Try that one more time. Hold on. Take two. Today I'm going to talk about typography. So what is typography? Well, it's the art and science of putting type into action. So for instance, if you're writing a paper or something, you've interacted with typography technically. Typography is all about communication. It's all about making sure that your message sticks with the person, that they retain what they read. Reading comprehension is the word that I like to use when describing the importance of typography. So today I'm going to go over a few little things, some do's and don'ts about typography, and hopefully if you pay attention, you may communicate better. I'm assuming that's important to you. If you're not trying to communicate, that's fine. Don't listen to me. I's and L's and E's, an A, capital A, lowercase a. Lowercase a in Helvetica has this beautiful eyebrow, I like to call it. It's like a little, hey, how you doing there? Let's see here. Everybody is using type in this digital world, whether it's on their Facebook page or if you're a business and you're creating your own business cards or brochures or whatever it might be, you are interacting with typography. So I'm going to give you a few tips to make sure that you communicate effectively and clearly. It's really important that when you're using type, I'm assuming the purpose of it is to communicate some sort of message. So whether that is trying to tell somebody about your latest sale or tell somebody about how you've got some interesting offering for your business, chances are you're going to use type. I remember my professor in college told me this really important lesson that I've never forgot. And he said when it comes to communication, we can do without audio because not everybody can hear. Sometimes you might have your phone and you don't have the audio turned on. So you can't always depend on that for communication. We can do without color because not everybody can see color, and moreover, sometimes our devices can't display it. If you're looking at something on a Kindle that doesn't have color, you're not going to see that, or if it's printed in black and white, you won't have that luxury. We can do without photos because not always do we have that option, whether it's printed on a receipt, you don't get the luxury of having a photo printed on there because the limitations of the printing process. But one thing we cannot do without is type. Type is the most functional and basic form of communication that we have as human beings. Thanks to Gutenberg for simplifying it for us and giving us access to everybody to be able to use it at a mass scale, we now have it in great quantities all over the place. And that's going to bring me into what I'm going to talk about, which is typography. Typography is very important. If you don't pay attention to the rules, well, there's a lot of them. I'm going to talk about the most important ones, some basic ones. If you don't pay attention to those, your message will very likely not communicate well. And I'm assuming the purpose of you writing something or putting it out there is to communicate. So let's talk about those. The first thing I want to talk about are letter forms. What are letter forms? Well, every font or typeface is created with a series of letter forms. And these things are designed by type designers who spend many, many years learning and mastering the art of designing type. So with that being said, it's very important that you take careful consideration when you're using these letter forms. We'll use the word font for now. Don't alter the font. That's the first one. Number one, do not alter the font. If you are doing that, you're a bad person and you're doing a bad thing. Don't do that. The reason for that is these things, like I said, had very careful consideration by the designers who created them to make sure that they communicate at large sizes as well as small sizes. And when you skew them, let's say you have a small box and your words can't fit in that box, so you squeeze your type together in a horizontal space to make it a little more vertical so that it'll fit in that box. Well, what you're doing is you're destroying the beautiful type forms that type designer created. I'll give you some examples with some images. So here is a Myriad Pro. This is what Myriad Pro looks like. You've probably used it. It's the default font for most applications on Adobe, especially on Apple devices. This is Myriad Pro when I've squeezed it. As you can see, the type forms have been squished. What's important is to notice that the vertical lines have become a lot more narrow. And unfortunately, when you squeeze type, the horizontal lines, they don't change. That's because you've squished it. So keeping that in mind, this beautiful letter form has now been damaged and it doesn't look good and won't communicate well. Our brains have studied for hours reading words on pages, and we've become very good at recognizing type in a very specific way. The moment you start messing with that, you're screwing with all our memory and hard work and training that we've devoted our whole lives as readers dedicated to. So don't do that. Don't do that. Don't ever do that. It's bad. You're a bad person if you do it. Here's what you should do. If you have type and you need it to fit in a space and your word is too long, try another word. If you can't work with another word, it has to be that word, use a condensed font. This is a version of Myriad Pro condensed. As you can see, the thickness and thinness of this beautiful font the integrity of it is kept all throughout the letter form. You can see the uniformity there. All right, that is the first thing you should do. Never mess with a font or typeface. Don't mess with those. Another really important thing to consider when you're putting type on a page is to consider the space around those letters. It's really important. I know you might think I'm wrong on this one, but trust me, I'm right. It's really important that there's lots of breathing room on those letters. Don't crunch them in there. If you have a business card and you have a lot to say on that business card, and I'm sure it's really important, you need to make your font smaller. Don't make it bigger. And definitely don't get a bigger card, because that's ridiculous. Wouldn't fit in anybody's wallet, and that's just stupid. What's important is that you make sure that you keep your font and your letters with plenty of breathing room. Give them space to breathe. I want to talk about caps lock. When should you use it? Caps lock is a great thing if you, honestly, it's really not that useful. Don't use caps lock. It's most likely just gonna screw up your stuff. Let's see here. Another really important thing when considering how you're putting your type on whatever piece of information you're trying to display is contrast. Contrast is vital. Again, our brains have worked many, many hours getting good at reading words that have high contrast. For instance, a white piece of paper with black ink on it. So if you are to screw that around and let's say put hot neon pink ink on a white page, first of all, that doesn't contrast very well. And secondly, our eyes and brains aren't very good at recognizing that. So it'll be hard for us to read, and more importantly, very hard for us to retain. It's very important with typography. One of the most important things is that people retain what you're trying to say. So that being said, make sure that you have good contrast. Pacing back and forth. She sells, darn it. So the last thing when it comes to typography that I'm going to talk about are fonts or font families. Really the correct word is typeface, but you probably don't care about what lingo I'm using, so we're just going to call it fonts. Fonts, since the digital age, have now become kind of out of control. That's because people who aren't graphic designers have access to a plethora of beautiful and exotic fonts. And this has become very exciting for us for the first time since our last Selectric typewriter to now have access to all kinds of different font families. Now, just because we can have access to these things doesn't mean we should. Technology often moves faster than mankind can keep up with. And again, just because we can do it doesn't mean we should. Jurassic Park was a whole story about that. If you don't understand what I'm saying, just look up most science fiction that was written in the early 20th century. They talk all about it. So that being said, they were warning us for this day when you and I have access to all kinds of fonts to show the world our beautiful and incredibly important message. So the first thing is, when you're using a font, just because it looks cool doesn't mean it will comprehend well. And secondly, just because it looks cool doesn't mean it marries well with your message. So I would recommend that in most cases, stick to the default fonts. Times New Roman is easy to comprehend. Why? Because we read it all the time. As many other graphic designers might boo me for saying that, the point is we are good at reading it. Same with Helvetica. Helvetica is beloved amongst most graphic designers because it communicates well at small sizes as well as large sizes. I know when you're selecting the fonts, you're like, oh, that one's boring and that one's boring. Oh, this one's exciting. Yeah, well, don't do that. If your message doesn't feel exciting, write a better message. Your words in a cool font aren't gonna be better. I'm not gonna go, oh wow, that's an exciting idea now that it's in a cool font. If it's a bad idea, poorly written words, putting it in a cool font with every letter in a different color isn't gonna make me more interested. So first of all, if you need to jazz up your message, jazz up your words. Write better. Don't change the font to something that's more exciting. So there's my rant on fonts. The bottom line is use the default ones. Helvetica, Times New Roman, Garamond, Minion, those are great. Verdana, Futura, we could be here all day. See here. Babus New is one that I've become very fond of recently. What is that one? Big fan of, what is that one? Well, actually, what else is another good font? Anyway, I digress. Okay, so that's it for my little tips on typography. My name is Trueson, and you just watched Brookside Studios Marketing Minute Monday. Next week, we've got Mike Shira, and he's going to give you some learning on marketing, advertising, web design, and all that other good stuff. Stay tuned.